Is it permissible to bathe or shower in hot water on Shabbat and Yom Tov?
The simple answer to that question is yes. It is mutar to bathe or shower in hot water on Shabbat and Yom Tov. And it is certainly the case that it is mutar to do the same in lukewarm or cold water also. But obviously most people would prefer to do so in hot water. So let me explain now briefly why it is mutar to bathe or shower in hot water on Shabbat or Yom Tov. This statement has to be qualified. First of all, in the time of Hazal, there was a gezerah not to bathe in hot water on Shabbat and Yom Tov. The reason for this gezerah was, as we find in the Gemara, in Masechet Shabbat and Talmud Bavli, Daf Lameteth and Daf Mem, the reason was that in those days, of course, there were bathhouses. People did not have bathrooms in their homes. Most people certainly did not. And the water was heated by fire in these bathhouses, and the reality was that more and more often it was seen that the people who owned the bathhouse, who ran the bathhouse, would heat the water on Shabbat and lie to people and tell them that the water was hot from yesterday, from Erev Shabbat, from Friday, and was kept hot by being covered and sealed, etc. And in this way they would cause many to sin, and they themselves would be sinning by heating water on Shabbat, which of course is cooking, which is of course asur, which is prohibited. It has to be understood that this gezerah is not relevant nowadays, and the reason for this is twofold. First of all, if we were to be living in the same situation where there were bathhouses, where water was heated by wood fires, etc., and there would be the same possibility of people heating water on Shabbat and lying about it, etc., then that gezerah would still be in place. But a gezerah pertains to a specific reality, and as long as we are discussing that particular reality, the gezerah is still in place. If we are speaking of an entirely different reality, then that gezerah is not bater. It's not null and void, but it is not relevant to the different situation, the different set of circumstances. Therefore, today we do not go to bathhouses. The water is not heated by wood fires, and there is no reason to assume that any of these phenomena will take place, that any such issue will exist, and therefore this is no longer an issue. That's number one. Number two, there can be no doubt that nowadays most people bathe regularly on a daily basis, and a person who is used to doing so on a daily basis, to bathe in hot water, is definitely mitzta'ir, which means is terribly uncomfortable and feels very bad, feels dirty, uncomfortable if he's not able to do so. A person who is mitzta'ir is not bounded by a prohibition which is based on a gezerah. This statement that where a person is mitzta'ir, and all people nowadays, certainly the vast overwhelming majority of people, are considered to be istanisim and mista'arim. They are certainly very, very eager to bathe on a daily basis, and do so all the time, and if they do not do so, they suffer. Therefore, all people today are considered to be mista'arim and istanisim, as we see in the case of Rabban Gamliel, who bathed on the first night after his wife was buried, where normally a person would not be allowed to bathe for 7 days. If it's if it's in the normal way of things, which in those days was to bathe once a week perhaps. Rabban Gamliel, when he was asked about this, replied to his students who saw that he went to the bathhouse the night after the burial. He said, I am not like most people, I am an istanis. There is no question that most, if not all people nowadays are istanisim. That is to say, a delicate person, a person who's very pedantic about his personal hygiene, a person who is very much used to a certain way of living, a certain mode of existence, which, if that is not possible, not available, the person suffers as a result. Today we are all like Rabban Gamliel, that is clear. And Rabbi Akiva Eger, based on what the Shulchan Aruch writes in Siman Shin Zayin in Hilchot Shabbat, explains that if a person is mista'er, that which is asur, that which was made asur by the Chachamim for reason of a gezerah, such as the gezerah with regards to the bathhouse, does not apply to such a person. And this we read explicitly in the Shulchan Aruch itself. I will quote briefly from the Shulchan Aruch. This is Siman Shin Zayin, Seif Hey. Here it speaks about the possibility of asking a non-Jew to do a certain melacha for us on Shabbat, something which we're not allowed to do for ourselves on Shabbat. And the last example mentioned by the Shulchan Aruch is that one is allowed to ask the non-Jew to bring water, that is to say hot water, via an area, chatzer, that is to say a courtyard, where there is no eruv, where one is not normally allowed to carry, so that a person who is mista'er, who is suffering because he's not able to bathe, will be able to do so. And Rabbi Akiva Eger states on this sif, he writes, Mashma, the mista'er mutar lirhos afilu gufo behamin shuchmu me'erev Shabbat. It is mutar, says Rabbi Akiva, for a person who is mista'er, who is suffering as a result of not being able to bathe all his body at the same time, as opposed to just washing one's face or hands, which is mutar according to all opinions for any person. It is mutar for such a person who is suffering, who is an istanis, who is mista'er, says Rabbi Akiva Eger, to bathe on Shabbat. And he explains the reason is this because it's rak mikoach gezerah, something where an isur, a prohibition exists for reason of a gezerah, which was enacted in order to prevent a certain halachic issue, a certain prohibition from taking place. That does not apply to a person who is suffering as a result of not being able to do that thing which was prohibited, if he is a mista'er. Today there's no question, we are all a mista'er. So that is the halakha with regards to bathing nowadays. This statement, by the way, of Rabbi Akiva Eger is also quoted by the HaHashanah at the very beginning of Siman Shin Kaf Waw in the Biur Halakha. Another issue which is sometimes raised is the question of soap. First of all, I will state here without going into the details that it is mutar to use all types of soap on Shabbat. Hard soap, soft soap, liquid soap, non-liquid soap. They are all mutar. There are those who disagree, I know, and that opinion, in my view, is based on a misunderstanding of the halakha. This was also the view of Mori Rabbi, my teacher, Harav Hagaon, Harav Yosef Gafech, or Kapach, if you prefer, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, as he writes explicitly in his commentary on Hilchot Shabbat of Rambam, in the Mishneh Torah of the Rambam. That's with regards to soap. Of course, with the fact of with regards to soap, seeing that soap, liquid soap, is available to all, even those who do not accept this opinion regarding hard soap, there is no issue. There's no problem not to. This is not a reason not to bathe on Shabbat or Yom Tov. The third issue that might be raised by some is that the Magen Avraham writes in Siman Shin Kaf Waw that the minhag of the Jews, that is to say, at least this was the case in Ashkenaz, in Europe, was not to bathe even in cold water on Shabbat. With regards to this, one has to say two things. First of all, we've already explained that if we're talking about people who are considered to be istanisim, pampered, delicate people who are used to a certain level of hygiene, as we all are today. And second of all, the fact that this practice of not bathing in cold water, which was certainly mutar according to all authorities, and Chazal never prohibited such a thing, the custom not to do so was based on, again, on the realities of that time, many centuries ago, when where the weather was much cooler, that is to say in Europe, B, where there was no possibility of bathing, usually inside the home, and C, people's standards of hygiene were very different. So the minhag, the practice that was common amongst Ashkenazi Jews in Europe in a very different climate from that which we have here in Eretz Yisrael or in many countries today where Jews reside, where the weather can be very hot, something which was most uncommon in Europe. Such a minhag is certainly not binding in a very different reality, where it definitely causes people to suffer, as we have explained before. There is also the question that is raised by some of sehita b'se'ar, that is to say, wringing water out of one's hair, for example. This is another issue which I will not go into here at length, but the essential halakha on this issue is that there is no isur of sehita when it comes to hair. There are opinions that say that there is such an issue, there is such an isur. The truth of the matter is there is no such isur when it comes to the hair of a human being which is attached to his body. There is certainly no isur to bathe and to dry oneself in the normal manner. And the fact of the matter is that we all know that both women and men go to the mikveh on Shabbat, and this is widely understood and accepted to be correct and proper. And this is so. This is the halakha. It is mutar to even to deliberately squeeze the water from one's hair on Shabbat. There is no isur involved in this. This is a longer discussion which we can have another time. One more issue which has to be discussed, of course, is the question of hot water. The question is, what is the source of this hot water? Here in Israel, Baruch Hashem, we have dudei shemesh, we have solar water heaters. Most people do, certainly. And again, there are always, or very often, different opinions on many issues, and there are those who forbid the use of the water from such a dud shemesh on Shabbat and Yom Tov. But there are also many major poskim, including Mori Rabbi Hagaon Rav Yosef Gafeh, Baal Tzitz Eliezer, Rav Waldenberg, and Rav Adi Yosef, for example. All these Chachamim and many others, and Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach was also of this view that to use the hot water from a dud shemesh is entirely permissible. If one does not have a dud shemesh, if one does not have a solar water heater, then one may use hot water from a water boiler, as most people have, for example, overseas, outside Israel, only if it is switched off, and if the water in that water heater is not hot to the point where it will cause the cold water entering it to become terribly hot, to reach a temperature of over 50 degrees, which is yad soredet bo. If this is not possible, given the circumstances of one's home and one's water system, then one can bathe in cold water. That is certainly not the ideal, but it's far better than not bathing at all, for most people in most circumstances. So again, the simple, straightforward answer is it is mutar, it is proper and correct and permissible to bathe even in hot water on Shabbat and Yom Tov, with the qualifications that we have just mentioned. And as Mori Rabbi Rav Yosef Gafeh writes in his commentary on the Rambam in Chot Shabbat, It is even a miswa to do so, because it is bichlal oner Shabbat. It is part of the miswa of honoring the Shabbat by doing pleasurable things during the Shabbat.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.